I've made a lot of mistakes over the years as an audiophile, so this video is about the mistakes I've made, the mistakes I've seen other people make, and how you can avoid them. Let's talk about it. The first one's kind of tough because it comes around and bites me in the butt. That's just listening to what people have to say and taking it as fact without doing your research. Now, that's a bit tough. You might know somebody who's popular on Discord, you might watch somebody on YouTube, that somebody could be me, and my opinions might not align with yours. The things that I like, you might not like at all, but because I'm an influential person and I say, hey, this is a thing that's good, well, you might get it, and there's always a chance you could be disappointed. But the flip side of that is just taking everything that more experienced people say as gospel, because experience doesn't always mean they're correct. There's a lot of people out there that might say a particular headphone is amazing, but then you get it in and it's actually not. Or you think, well, this is amazing, so I have to like this. I should really try and like this thing because people say it's good. Here's an example. This is my beloved HT6XX. Now, I've had this headphone in one way, shape, or form for so many years, through the HT600, the 650, and so on. I'll always have one of these in my collection. Some people will find this headphone boring. I mean, it doesn't have a ton of sub bass. It does so many things right, but there are people out there who will find this headphone boring. That's just the reality of it. It doesn't make it a bad headphone, but it might not be the best fit for them. And just because this is something that everybody will recommend, and I think the vast majority of people will love this, there are some of you out there that won't. One size does not fit all. Now, there are certain boundaries that we know the average listener has a preference within. I think that pretty much all of you will find something that fits within that window, but it doesn't mean that you'll like everything in that window. It means that part of that window is more to your preferences and part of it isn't. And with that said, there's another one I'd like to go into, which is measurements. See, measurements are great. They help us standardize and quantify different aspects of sound. You don't have to argue about what's neutral. You can look at a windowed response and see, well, neutral is somewhere in here. Now, that's different from flat. There isn't really an agreed upon standard of what flat is. But even Dr. Olive, the pioneer behind the Harman target, said, the Harman target is only a guideline that seems to satisfy the majority of tastes. And that's really what it boils down to, but there's another side of measurements, and that's the understanding of them. It's really easy for something to click and then think you understand the full picture, but there is so much more to it, down to methodology, the different rigs used, the fact that raw measurements cannot be compared between rigs, and even that a lot of the information around rigs, well, it both can and sometimes is wrong. This is going to be a whole other thing, but we actually recently discovered that a lot of the calibrations associated with some popular measurement rigs were not entirely accurate. Now, does this have any big implications? Maybe, maybe not. In fact, it might change nothing. But it tells us a lot of work is still being done. There's some really good videos on this channel you can use to learn more about measurements. I highly recommend checking those out if you're remotely interested in it. I'll put them in the link in the video description. If you watch them enough, Andrew might even smile. Another critical mistake is weighing how much things really matter. Your headphone matters more than the entire rest of your chain. It matters more than your DAC, your amp, even, honestly, the music you're listening to, as long as it's above 320 kilobits. You are not going to walk into a showroom and tell if someone is playing Spotify, Tidal, or Qobuz just based off the sound. You might be able to tell A/Bing them side by side, but you're not going to know initially unless you hear them side by side. And even then, I think a lot of people won't hear the difference. Your headphone, that's like 99% of your sound, unless you're using an amplifier that has a higher output impedance and higher distortion of various kinds, like a tube amp, and your headphone has non-linear impedance to pair with that. Or if your headphone's impedance just falls outside of the range of impedance the amplifier is designed to handle, like using certain headphones on Class D speaker amps. Am I saying that all amps don't matter? No, but what I am saying is that this is what matters the most. The next one's price, and this one's bound to ruffle some feathers. Price and sound quality, they don't actually correlate. Now, does this mean that expensive things are bad and cheap things are good? No, but sometimes what it means is some cheap things are really good and some expensive things are really bad. There is not a direct connection between something being more expensive and it sounding better. Now, there are more things that are expensive that sound good than there are cheap things, but there's also a ton of expensive things that are kind of terrible. I mean, just straight up outwardly terrible, and not just terrible like most people will hate this, terrible like pretty much everybody who hears this is going to find a problem with it. So just because something has a bigger price tag, it doesn't mean you're actually getting a better product. Sometimes it really does, and there's plenty of things in my collection that are expensive. Modhouse Tungsten right there. That is not a cheap headphone at all, but it is one of the best planars I have ever heard in my life. But this is the Sony MDR7506, a headphone you can get on eBay for $40 to $50 with a $30 set of Yaxi Deluxe pads. They're really good. I've heard multi-$1,000 closebacks that are worse than these, and the total price of this build is under $100. Same with this. This is the Sony CD900 ST with the Yaxi ST2 pads. This is a headphone from the 1980s, and it still is one I use all the time. It measures well, it sounds good, and it's cheap. Price and sound quality don't correlate, but you can get some things that are expensive that are really incredible. Just don't think the price tag is the reason why it's good. Chasing the intangibles. So there are things we talk about like dynamics, detail, soundstage imaging that are sort of standardized in their definitions. Detail's not quite as much. There's a lot of people that don't agree what detail is, and there's no way to measure soundstage imaging, detail, and so on. In fact, as time has gone on, it seems like while a good chunk of people perceive soundstage in a similar way, a lot of people also just don't. There are plenty of people who do not perceive soundstage in headphones, the width of the sound you're listening to. There's other people who experience it more in things like IEMs. It likely is a reflection of how the headphone interacts with that person's HRTF, their head-related transfer function, and the same is probably true for IEMs. But without knowing the head-related transfer function of every single person listening and how that matches up to the headphone, it's not really possible to know how that's going to affect their perception of soundstage and imaging. And so if I say, well, then this one headphone has great soundstage, that might be the case for me, but it might not be the case for you. Which is why it's important to find a reviewer whose preferences you align with, but also who communicates things in a way that's effective and easy for you to understand. But it's also why things like measurements, when done well, are extremely important to the process. This is a record player. Record players are objectively bad, but I love my record player. Right underneath it is a CD player, something that is objectively good, and I love my CD player just as much. You are listening to a medium that has been altered so many times. Distortion has been added to it in the studio, distortion's been added to it in the mix and master. Things are being changed a bajillion times from the actual live performance of the instrument in the studio space to when it reaches your ears. I think that having a good set of speakers and a good headphone is the most important thing, especially if you're looking for more accurate sound, but additional distortions or colorations, things that are added by tubes or a record player or something like that, well, they don't have to be bad. It could be something that you really, really enjoy. And with this, part of it is the experience. I love taking a record out of the sleeve, putting it on, starting it up, letting the album play all the way through and flipping it. And while that's happening, reading through the booklet, checking out the artwork that came with the record. Things that you just don't get when you are listening on a streaming service, which is why a lot of things I discover on streaming and then purchase the actual physical media to enjoy at home. The flip side is a lot of the changes made by record players, made by tube amps, and things of that nature are measurable changes. In fact, in a lot of these cases, you can also change the frequency response. I've got an interesting video about output impedances worth checking out. I'll also put that in the video description. But if you were to use a headphone with a nonlinear impedance on a output transformerless tube amp, well, you could see a frequency response change that is measurable. And not just in terms of distortion, I mean in terms of frequency response. And sometimes that measurable change is actually an objectively better improvement. Not always, but sometimes. I'm not saying you have to like the idea of harmonic distortion or frequency response changes, but it is something that can affect your sound in a pleasant way. And there's a few sides to that. There are hardcore purists who want everything to be as clean and objective as possible. There's also people who want to just kick back and enjoy their music, and that's what, predictably, the last one I have to say today is, don't lose sight of why you're doing this to begin with. Now, for some people, that is just collecting lots of gear. All they want to do is collect gear. Some people want to have the most objective to the numbers system possible, but those people also need to realize that, well, a lot of this is gray area. A lot of the actual targets you're aiming for aren't entirely agreed upon, and a lot of standards still aren't set in stone. So while I love that and I support it, and I think we're moving more in that direction, you are on a journey just like the rest of us. Whatever it is that you enjoy the most about this hobby, why you are in this hobby to begin with, don't lose sight of it. I bought hundreds of headphones over the years, and I've narrowed my collection down now to roughly 20. That's still a lot of headphones, and a lot of them measure relatively similar, though there's a few outliers. But there's little changes between a lot of them that I appreciate. And who knows, eventually I'm probably going to narrow my collection down even more. Same goes for my speakers. I got rid of almost all of my speakers except for this pair, the JBL 306P Mark II, and one other pair that's in my back room. And we're talking rooms full of tower speakers. But I love the way these sound. I leave them set up and I get a chance to really just enjoy the music. I'll put on a record or CD, kick back on my couch, look at the artwork, and enjoy myself. Now, this could be a much longer list. I have many more things I could talk about, mistakes that I personally have made. If you want to know more of those, if you want me to do another video like this, let me know and leave a comment down below. But what I also want to know is, what are some things you've learned over the years in audio? How long have you been in this hobby? Maybe you've learned something after only being in here for weeks. Either way, I'd like to know what you guys have to say. I read every single comment, so I'll be down there looking. So, thanks guys for stopping by. I think that's going to wrap up this video. It's been good hanging out with you. If you like this video, leave a like down below. A comment, let me know what you want to see in the future. If you want to get active in the community, you can hit the forum or Discord, both available at the link in the video description. And as always, don't forget to stick around and subscribe for more videos like this in the future. Till next one, guys. Peace.